Hi everyone, good evening. Welcome to Live After 5. It's so dark now, it feels like it's much later. Just waiting to see if there's anyone coming on. Not yet. Okay, well look, I will start and just want to share with you my latest property blog. Hi Alan, thanks for joining. So I just want to share with you my latest property blog, which I wrote at the early hours of this morning. It's about the rental market. Hi Chloe, thanks for watching. So in terms of November and the market, in terms of the residential property market, hi Margaret, there's really very little in terms of supply that's new. Today, on the 9th of November, there are 10 properties in all of Waterford City to rent, okay? And that includes 2 student properties. There are further 6 in the county, of which 1 is a holiday home. That's the extent of it. And I was just sharing how we advertised one particular property yesterday, and within a couple of hours, there were 647 online views. So that's just a snapshot of the supply levels, which is getting worse and worse. Now, there's an awful lot of uncertainty going on and conversation around new legislation that's been enacted and the rent pressure zone. So I just want to talk about this new legislation. According to the Irish Times last week, there's been a 7% increase in rents recorded for the second quarter of 2021. And this is based on the rents registered with the Tenancy Board. Now, Pat Devitt is the CEO of the Institute of Auctioneers and Valuers, which is the organisation we're also members of, a very, very credible organisation that represents professional estate agents and valuers. And Pat said that basically the data does not differentiate between new and existing rental stock. Or between properties that are outside the rent pressure zone. That's a really, really important point, because not all things are equal. For example, John Garvin's not in the rent pressure zone. Waterford City, most of it is in the rent pressure zone, but there are properties in Grey Stew and properties on O'Connell Street that are not within the rent pressure zone. So those rent prices are blended into everything, and also new builds and properties that were previously occupied by homeowners don't fall into the rent pressure zone for the first letting. So in other words, if we were renting someone's home, they moved out of the property and they wanted to rent it, they can set the rent at the market value. So there is no restriction on the rent charged. And then a brand new build, we'll say there's loads in Dublin that are purpose-built apartment blocks for rental. They can, and mostly owned by funds, they can charge whatever rent they want. But typically Mary and Frank, who represent over 75% of landlords who maybe own only 1 or 2 properties, most properties are in the rent pressure zone and they are restricted to renting within those guidelines. And if you're wondering if your property is in the rent pressure zone or about a property, you just have to type in RPZ, put in the air code, and it will tell you. Now, there's been an awful lot of uncertainty around inflation and the caps on rents, because it's been changing. So earlier this year, the rent cap of 4%, the annual rent cap of 4%, changed in line with inflation, the Harmonised Index of Consumer Prices, HIPC. And now there's new legislation that's going to be enacted under the Tenancy Act, whereby you can only increase rent from 2%. This is coming into law this month and will be immediately effective as of early December. First week in December, I expect. So what this means, that if your property rent is €1,000, then you can increase the rent on an annual basis by 2% only if you're in the rent pressure zone. And I think it's very likely that government will bring in an extension to the rent pressure zone beyond the current location. So for example, as I mentioned, Dungarvan and West Waterford aren't in the rent pressure zone, but most of Waterford City is. Approximately 74% of all tenancies are within the rent pressure zone. Now, Pat Davitt has made an excellent case for the RTB to produce better data, which ultimately drives policy formation and public opinion. Now, there is another point on the new residential tenancy bill that I'd like to discuss, which is due to be published this month, is in relation to, I'm just reading this now, oh yes, the bill will introduce tenancies of indefinite duration. Now, what does that mean? Well, at the moment, if a person is renting a property and they are in the property over 6 months, then they're entitled to stay there up to 6 years. Now, the landlord can give notice on certain grounds. So, for example, the landlord can give notice mainly if they are selling the property, if them or a family member are wishing to move into the property and the appropriate notice is required. And if anyone wants to check that, you just go onto the RTB website, okay? But in terms of indefinite, just double check my indefinite duration of lease, that means now that ultimately when somebody rents a property, it's for life, it's for security of tenure, but the landlord still has entitlement to issue notice under the grounds discussed, or if there's a serious breach of the lease, which a landlord has to be able to prove. So my advice is, if you're renting property, it's all about suiting excellent tenants who have great track record, who take care of the property. Okay. And okay, now the Minister for Housing mentioned in this Irish Times article, he respects the constitutionally protected property rights of landlords and aimed to safeguard continued investment in the sector by existing and new landlords. The Minister acknowledged that over 23,000 rental properties have been lost since 2017, and a plan needs to be put in place to stop this. Now, what is the plan? I haven't heard anything about that. I'm not going to hold my breath, but I think it's unlikely that the government are going to adjust the large tax liability placed upon landlords. For those watching, basically landlords pay up to 60% tax on the rental income. So if they're getting 1,000 in rent, up to 60% is paid out on taxes. And that's, I think, in my opinion, the tax treatment is unlikely to be affected. But I think looking at the deductible items, the deductible charges, that is really where there's an opportunity to, I suppose, assist landlords and keep them in the market. Because at the end of the day, we need the landlords in the market to provide the supply, because the landlords, the individual landlords, and I'm talking about these big funds, are the main suppliers of stock in Ireland. And when I look today at the amount of properties available in Waterford City, which stands at 10 properties, and 2 of which are students, and a further 6 in the county, it just goes to show how dire it is. And I had a gentleman on the phone today who was quite annoyed with me and irate because he wasn't, his application wasn't accepted for a rental property. And I explained to him, I'm sorry, disappointed, but at any given time we've no more than 3 properties to rent, and we have between 40 to 60 applicants for each rental property. So it's very, very difficult, and I'm very empathetic to anybody looking to rent right now. And my tip to you is to get your references together and be organised, because it is a battle of the fittest. It's equivalent actually to going for a job interview. So I hope you found that of interest. I will attach a link to the blog later, Have a lovely evening. Hi, Elaine. Thanks for joining me. Have a lovely evening. As I always say, slán go fóill, gurb míle.